This is the Trust Effect, and I'm so happy that you're here with me this morning. Today is August 11th, 2026. And if you received the email or the post that I sent out on Sunday, titled What Are We Agreeing To? Same as this particular live, I decided that it might be time to start diving into the agreements that we make, but not just the agreements that we make, because we talk about that kind of on a regular basis around here, but what is the actual structure of an agreement? And the reason I'm feeling compelled to talk about this right now is something came up for me last week in my social feeds that was noteworthy. But I feel like the moment I started operating through the 5 elements of a contract and looking at the world through what I've learned to be the 5 primary elements of a contract, everything changed about how I show up and participate. It became a really pivotal moment for me in my own understanding of what I'm actually looking at day in and day out and what's being presented to me, not only from governments and corporations and institutions in the workplace, but in my closest relationships, and most specifically the relationship with myself. And I think it's really important to um, disclaim before we go any further into this conversation that I'm not a lawyer. I don't have any formal legal training. So therefore, please do not conflate what I'm about to say as legal advice. While I consider myself a student of the law. It's something that I'm incredibly interested in and have been since I was a young girl. In fact, I actually had always planned to go to law school. That was something that I had always wanted to do since I was quite young. However, university was not for me, based on a series of circumstances I found myself in during my first 2 years. By the time I get to my third year, I was at the University of New Brunswick, and by the time I got to my third year, I was like, I can't be here anymore. And so I did a hard pivot into design and architecture, which ultimately, as the stars aligned, all of my interests seemed to kind of converge. And I now find myself working at the intersection of structural design um, and legal principles, both what we know inside of our traditional government constructed legal systems, as well as natural law and laws of man, which has been a really interesting, it's been a very interesting journey, I would say. But the last few weeks have been eye-opening for me. I often say it doesn't matter how much work you do on yourself. There's really no such thing as healed. I don't really believe in healing. I only believe in being. And that's because you never know what is going to appear for you and going to come up for you that is going to challenge everything you thought you'd resolved, right? New levels, new devils. You never know what information, what personalities, what circumstances and situations you're going to find yourself in that is going to challenge your ability to remain neutral, to stay regulated, to stay inside of your integrity. And for me, the last 2 weeks have proved pretty challenging. It's been a bit of a dark few days, if you will. Not to mention in Nova Scotia, crazy heat waves. It's been incredibly hot and humid, so you're unusually in your body. Um, I've called it like a week of expansion, if you will, where everything just feels like it's expanding. Doors are expanding, floors are expanding, bodies are expanding. Everything just feels like it's being kind of pushed to its limits right now, including like heat tolerances. Everything seems to come to the surface when we throw heat and humidity into the mix. And for all of my astrology and astronomy buffs, we also know that it's energetically, as above, so below, a bit of an intense portal, if you will. Today, August 11th. Tomorrow, August 12th, is depending on where you are in the world, total or partial solar eclipse. We have an alignment of 6 planets happening. We have a new moon. And then in another 2 weeks, we have the lunar eclipse, which we are 70 to 90% water, depending on how hydrated you are. We know that the moon shapes the tides at a very basic level when we're in eclipse season. Things get a little wacky inside of the body. So it's also a good time to just kind of pay attention to what's coming up for you right now, and people that are showing up, thoughts that are coming up, triggers that you might ordinarily not notice. Everything seems to be a little more heightened right now, and it probably will be for the next few weeks. So it's just always worth paying a little attention to. But before we dive in, it was so interesting. I hadn't looked at the theme for the Daily Sovereign, or the theme of the week in the Daily Sovereign, before I decided what I wanted to talk about today. And ironically or unironically, the theme this week is action, right? How we take action, how we move into action, what that looks like. And action is your participation. And participation is formed by our agreements. So I'm like, oh, this is just working out perfectly. So I'm just going to kick off with this week's Daily Sovereign, and then I'm going to talk about what caught my attention last week, because I haven't really been looking at the news a lot, but something very important caught my attention and made me go, time to look at agreements and contracts. So we are week 8, day 3 of summer. So we've got like 4 weeks left, 4.5 weeks left before we turn the page into fall, which is crazy. But this week kept going. It doesn't become real because you mean it. It becomes real because you kept going. A prayer becomes real when it enters the way you live. Love becomes real when it reaches your tone, your timing, your presence, your restraint. A decision becomes real when it continues after the mood that inspired it has changed. This is why action can feel so humbling. It demands more than sincerity, it demands embodiment, and it shows whether what is beautiful in thought can survive in contact with a day that's ordinary, inconvenient, demanding, and unfinished. Not everything can, but what can be carried into action belongs to you in a very specific way. And so originally what was making me very crunchy over the last week and a half, and I know I've talked about this ad nauseum, but it really was a pivotal turning point for the world. It has really shaped to where we are present day, and how we form our collective agreements, how we communicate with each other, how we treat each other. But that was the pandemic of 2020, and the Fauci congressional hearings, where the man who said unequivocally and repetitively, trust the science, trust what I say, everything I'm doing is in your best interest. You have to mask, you have to stay 6 feet away from each other. You have to hold other people accountable if they're not doing these things. And I stand behind this mandate so strongly that no matter what happens going forward, I will sit in front of any hearing or body and stand on what I'm saying. And then he pled the fifth, like over 100 times, including on the color of his tie. Now, was I expecting anything different? No, I was not expecting anything different, but I think a lot of other people were. And it brought a lot up for me. And it's not because I wasn't anticipating this happening. I always assumed the timeline would be 2026, 2027 when all of this started to shake out. It was going to be like a 4 to 5 year differential between what we experienced and when the facts of what we were being told started to kind of separate, right? Like the wheat from the chaff. Like we were going to start seeing that. What became problematic for me were my social media feeds. In the sense that what I started seeing was an onslaught of people getting really activated again, who were like, we told you, we saw this happening, we said you, not that you don't have to comply, but you need to ask better questions. Well, some people are saying that. You have to ask better questions. The contracts and the agreements that you were expecting me to enter into weren't as stable as we said they were. The agreements that you made collectively as a society on how you were going to treat each other, highly problematic. But it was the news clips, people pulling news clips from that time, and the absolute total and utter dehumanization that occurred during that time. And it was triggering because I lived through it, I experienced it. I couldn't walk through public without being assaulted. I couldn't move freely in any way, shape, or form. I did, but not without a cost. There was an absolute cost to doing that. But it also reminded me how fundamentally my participation has been shaped and changed since that time. So I started the pandemic in Montreal, I finished it in Nova Scotia, and I can confidently and unequivocally say, for example, I have not stepped foot in a restaurant since the 7th of March of 2020. My participation fundamentally changed. There are certain stores, there are certain businesses I will not step foot in and have not stepped foot in because I was treated as less than human during that time. There are family members I'll probably never have contact with again. There are people socially that I will probably never have contact again because of the agreements they made with themselves that was informed by partial information that caused them to treat me less than human. And I think a lot of people in my position didn't forget, but once everything opened up, they kind of forgot, right? Their participation didn't stay altered permanently, right? And in a very transactional society, which is what we live in, you vote with your dollar, right? You vote with your dollar 100% of the time. Because again, we live in a society that values money as the primary currency, as the primary resource, as the life-sustaining resource. And then we govern ourselves according to that. So during that time, there were plenty of people. I mean, I was working with people right across the country. And again, not a lawyer, not in a legal capacity, but kind of helping them read through contracts, understand agreements, whether they were finding themselves in potentially scary custody battles um, over vaccination status, or if they were um, kind of looking down the barrel of a gun with an employer over vaccination status. Like people's ability to remain in connection to community and to keep a roof over their head was held to them at gunpoint during that time. And I don't know if everybody fully felt that. And actually, I know they didn't fully feel that. There are people that were just like, yeah, no problem. I'm going to do whatever you tell me to do. Then there were other people saying, I'm not going to do it. And then there were people sitting there going, I could lose everything if I don't. These are all agreements. These are all agreements. And as I said was it last week? Or 2 weeks ago, every decision, everything we do has a consequence. And consequences is a very neutral statement. It can be good, it can be bad, but everything has a consequence. And so when we are thinking about the agreements that we're going to form with ourselves, with other people, with society, with corporations, with the government, we have to understand what we're looking at, because unless we're being handed like a piece of paper that we have to put our signature on, we don't necessarily think of everything as a contract or as an agreement that we're binding. But what I learned during that time was that silence is acquiescence, meaning if you do not say something, do something, you have agreed with what's happening. And that a lot of things that happen specifically inside of our civic systems happens through our participation via our silence. And that notice is a really important thing that we're not taught, right? Sometimes we understand notices as in you might get a notice from your landlord, or you'll get a notice from your bank, or you'll get I don't know, we get notices from a variety of different places. But there's a lot of notices that we get on a regular basis that we don't actually deem to be a notice, such as a posting for a public hearing that requires civic participation, or a press release that goes out from the government, or something that is released through the news that is disseminated to the public to say, hey, guess what? This is about to happen. We just look at it and go, oh, that's about to happen. But we don't realize that a lot of that is information that can actually be deemed a notice. And most notices have waiting periods. And they have waiting periods because you cannot take action on someone without providing them specific notice and allowing that period to lapse without falling into bad faith. And sometimes the notice period is very short. Sometimes it's long. But you were given a notice. So say, for example, you're leasing a car and you get a notice letting you know that you were late on your payment, and they will give you 30 days before they come and repo the car. They can't repo your car inside of those 30 days because they've given you notice, and in good faith you have 30 days to do that. And if you don't make your payment, if you do not call and make an arrangement, if you do not engage that through your silence, they're going to say, at the 30 days, you've not fulfilled your end of the bargain. We're coming and we're taking your car. And so I treated the pandemic much like that. Everything was a notice. And then I started looking at notices as offers to contract. Because when I would read the emergency management orders, there were exhaustive exemptions in our emergency management orders when it came to masking and well, there wasn't even anything in there for vaccination status. but there was extensive and exhaustive list of exemptions because it was never, ever, ever mandatory. Like, ever mandatory. Because something cannot be mandatory and have an exhaustive list of exemptions. Those two words, they don't play well together. They're incompatible. But yet, all we heard was mandatory, mandatory, mandatory. The moment a business put up a sign on their front door, that was an offer to contract. They were saying, we're only going to do business with you if you do X, Y, and Z. But the actual contract they were operating under was the emergency management orders, which said you can't actually do that. And FYI, if you go ask your insurance company if I sue you for discrimination because you're putting up this, they're going to tell you you're on your own. And a lot of businesses found that out the hard way. But to get off the COVID train, the reason I wanted to have this conversation is something that I found really interesting happening last week was in my Instagram feed. I follow the Halifax Regional Municipality. And when I would look through their stories, I kept seeing public hearing notices appearing in their stories, which disappear after 24 hours. But if I went looking for them in their news feed, they weren't there. And I was like, that's interesting. That's interesting. Because as I said earlier, I look at notices as offers to contract. So when I see a public hearing notice, that is in my lens of participation. And again, not a lawyer, not talking about this from a legal standpoint. I'm talking about this from how I choose to shape my participation. I see that notice as an offer to enter into contract with the municipality because they're saying, hey, we want to come in and make changes to your community. No objections? Okay, great. We're going to move through because no one showed up and objected to what we want to do. So we're just going to keep going. I thought it was really interesting. Now, in the past, legal notices would have to be posted in what was considered like acceptable public forms. So for example, in the government, they put things in Nova Scotia, they put it in the Gazette. So anything that goes from the Executive Council or the legislature, if they want to enact a change or something on the public, they have to post it in what's known as the Royal Gazette. So I learned like during COVID, during the pandemic, before the emergency management orders were signed and put out, they had to post them in the Gazette. They had to give public notice every single time before they did it. You can go back through the archives and see every single one of them like clockwork every 2 weeks. And so with the HRM, they made amendments to the Halifax Charter, whereas before they used to have to put them in the newspaper. One of the primary purposes of the newspapers in the past were places to post notice. So I think you could remember like death notices, marriage announcements, because you can object to a marriage. So like engagement and marriage notices, death announcements, in case you need to contest a will, properties that were being auctioned or for sale, bankruptcy notices would go in there. Like if you went into a law firm, the lawyers always grabbed the newspapers so they could read the notice section to see if there was anything that might affect some of their clients. Really important stuff. So I've started looking at, like I said, press releases going out from various agencies as notices to the public, where you now have an opportunity to show up and participate. So going back to the HRM, I noticed, I'm like, oh, there's 3 pretty big public hearings happening this week or this month for the month of August in the HRM. And if you go to the HRM website, it's not organized very well. They have them broken down into different buckets. You have to do a lot of scrolling. They're in drop-down notices. They're not in chronological order based on how you have to scroll. It's kind of messy. One of the notices, and the HRM is only required, the clerk is only required to give 7 days notice before they have these. And one has to do with a wall height that they want to change on Dutch Village Road. I'm not super familiar with that one. Another has to do with a land development in the Lake Loon area around Montague Road. That's a big one. And then the other one has to do with an open house in Lucasville on August 20th to shape the future development of the community. And that's one that you actually have to RSVP to attend. And these are showing up in Instagram in disappearing messages, which I actually did a podcast on that, an impromptu one a couple weeks ago on the power of disappearing messages and what they can actually do and the agreements that we form around these. And I have an article written on that as well. I'll post it in the show notes. It's important. And so when we're posting things like that in spaces that are going to reach a limited amount of people for a limited amount of time, what does that actually say about the integrity of our system, right? And going back to what I was saying earlier, we live in a very transactional society. And when we think about going into relationship with people, we often talk about like give and take. There's always give and take. But give and take doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be equity in that equation. It doesn't mean that everyone's necessarily showing up with clean hands. It doesn't mean that everyone's showing up in good faith. And it doesn't mean that there's going to be a reciprocal exchange when we're operating through give and take. And so when you start to look at the world through offer and acceptance instead, everything starts to change a little bit. The balance of what we're looking at becomes, it starts to show where things are either going to be reciprocal, where we're going to find equity, where we're going to find appropriate consideration and exchange and a meeting of the minds through the exchange that's happening, or we're not. And so this is where the 5 elements of a contract become really, I think, important to start understanding. And there's 6, and if you start talking to lawyers, they're gonna talk about like legality as well. Legality being, does the contract sit within the confines of the actual law, which matters if we're dealing with some of our public systems. But for the intents and purposes of this conversation, I just want to talk about the 5 primary elements that I've been using that has, like I said, shaped the way I participate in our systems. And that's offer, acceptance, consideration, mutuality, and capacity, right? So offer being, what is being presented to me? What are you coming to me with? And again, an offer can be something from the government saying, hey, we want to come in and redevelop your community. Hey, we want to make a change to the stoplights. Hey, we're going to start putting speed bumps in. Can be anything. There's usually a notice somewhere for things like this, which is why I look at notices as offers to contract, because they can't just give you a notice and do it right away. There's a waiting period, because you have to have the ability to accept or reject the offer. That's where acceptance comes in, right? And this is where the power of what's known as rebuttal is really important, right? Because you can be handed an offer and go, everything looks great, tick, 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 I'm going to take it. Or you can look at it and go, whoa, I have some serious concerns. And I see that you have offered me XYZ 1, 2, 3, but I'm taking issue with 3 and Y. And we need to have a conversation about this. Because when I look at, 3 and Y, for example, I'm not seeing consideration. So consideration is what is being exchanged in this particular offer. It can be time, attention, energy, money, land, etc. But consideration must be paid. Then you look at it and go, mutuality. So mutuality being, is there a meeting of the minds? Is what I'm reading and what you're reading, are we interpreting it the same thing? Does it mean the same thing? Do we have a literal meeting of the minds of what we're looking at? And that when you execute this offer, that it's going to be exactly what you say it's going to be? Do we have all of our facts straight? Is everything in writing? Is it on the table? Do we both understand what's happening? Because if anyone's been in a relationship, you know that you can be in a relationship with someone else and both of you are looking at the relationship as two completely different things. There's not necessarily a meeting of the minds, right? And then capacity. What is being asked of me in my capacity in this particular agreement? And the person who is presenting the agreement, what is their capacity? Right? Capacity not necessarily being how much you can hold, which is also very important because, when we look at our civic systems, they're busting at the seams. They don't have the capacity to be executing the things that they're telling us must be executed. They don't have the manpower. They don't seem to have the money. They don't have the planning, the intelligence, etc., to be doing what they're telling us they're going to do. There's a capacity issue there. But then also, what is the role and the title of the person presenting it to you? And this is where I'm always going back to the 4 conditions of trust, because trust requires capacity. Like, who are you? What is the function of your role? Governance, what are the agreements, the contracts, the laws, the regulations that you are required to work inside of, and are you doing it continuously over time, right? So when we're looking at agreements and contracts and the 5 elements of a contract, they really are the foundational basis of governance, right? Because governance, those documents, the contracts that you enter with people, the agreements that you enter with people, let you see and shake out what are the laws, the bylaws, the policies, the regulations, the administrative orders? Who has the right to execute those and why? They're really, really important documents. They allow us to start reverse engineering something like this, to look at trust, to see if what we're being asked to agree to, accept, is trustworthy. And if it's not, you have the right to say, no, I don't accept your offer. I don't accept what's being placed in front of me. This is what seems fair. Because at the end of the day, if our agreements can't be trustworthy and be trusted, what are we actually doing? And that's why it's always like an inside out endeavor, right? We're constantly making agreements with ourselves based on the values that we hold and the integrity that we move through this world with. And a lot for me, that's, can you witness your life, right? That's why I'm always telling people to halt for a second. Before you enter an agreement, before you enter a contract, before you make a decision, you have to halt. Honesty, acceptance, loyalty, trust. Am I building trust with myself so that I can be trustworthy to other people? Is what I'm being asked to do or what I'm about to do? Am I doing it from a place of honesty? Can I accept everything that's about to happen? Can I accept how we got to this position? Can I choose to be loyal to the truth instead of a lie and make the changes, the decisions, the micro adjustments needed in order to learn how to trust myself going forward? I know I use a lot of acronyms and I know I jump around a lot, but it's because this entire system that I've kind of developed to help us see what's in front of us is recursive, meaning there is no endpoint. It's not linear. It's always looping and moving back on itself. Because in order to be able to participate from a place of neutrality, from a place of trustworthiness, it requires structure. There has to be structure. Like, even if you get into this pseudo spiritual worlds where they like to talk about like the divine masculine and the divine feminine, they're always talking about structure versus flow, right? And when you have a really solid structure, things can flow through it. It's like trying to move water through a garden hose that's full of holes. You're going to lose pressure. You're not going to have the water at the end that you need, if at all. The hose is the structure, the water is the flow. If you have a solid structure, you'll have appropriate flow. And so the agreements that we're entering into and making, the moment we can become aware that every time we're presented with something, what am I being offered? Am I willing to accept that? Well, I don't know if I'm going to be willing to accept that until I explore it a little deeper and make sure that there's appropriate consideration. This is like the reciprocity piece. Am I getting an appropriate exchange in this situation? So if someone's coming in and they're asking to make significant changes to my community, is the exchange equitable? Meaning, am I going to be able to prosper in that community? Will my children prosper in that community? Is there going to be costs that I'm going to have to bear with my time, my attention, my energy, my peace in order for you to execute these changes? Is everyone on the same page about exactly, and I mean exactly down to every last detail, what's going to happen? And are the people who are making these decisions, do they have the appropriate capacity to do that? And am I, as a citizen, standing in my capacity in this agreement as well? And this is why these public meetings are so problematic for me, because nobody knows they're happening. They don't know where to look. They don't even know that they need to look. They react. People tend to react after the fact, after the damage is already done. And they can always come back and say, well, we had the meetings. Did you come? Did you show up? Did you write? Did you put anything? Did you give us anything to say that you were not satisfied, and why? This is why Dartmouth Cove in Nova Scotia is such an interesting example, because it had so much community. Not only is it a jurisdictional nightmare because it's a development that requires private developers, the municipality, the province, and the federal government to get everything sorted, but the residents of the area went, absolutely not in our backyard are you doing this. Not in our backyard are you doing this. And it's been completely stymied. It's at a stalemate right now because they were presented with an offer and they went, hell no. There's not equal and equitable exchange here. And so from a civic perspective, understanding, offer, acceptance, consideration, mutuality, capacity is so important. But then there is like the legal piece as well, which is you can have a contract with someone and it can be brought into the courts and ripped up because the fundaments of the contract violate basic law, right? Not every contract is a perfect contract, but more times than not in our life, we have a handful of written contracts that we kind of have them, but most things are through silent agreements that we have with each other in the way that we interact, in the way that we engage. I have quite a few articles actually on my Substack under the field literacy heading where I broke down several different aspects of life where we enter into agreement, whether it's with religion and spirituality and our belief systems, our family systems, our relational systems, how we engage with the media, law, finance, There's 11 different articles. I can't think of all of them off the top of my head. And a lot of them, I wrote them with the intention of being able to challenge the agreements that we make with ourselves in those spaces that affect our participation, how we show up, and how it forms our perception, and how those perceptions drive our actions. Right, getting back to the theme of the Daily Sovereign this week on action. Because you can have all of the beautiful thoughts and all of the ideas, but if you can't take action on them, they just remain a beautiful thought and a beautiful idea. But action happens actively or passively, right? This is why I've talked about the importance of reading silence, because silence is an action. When you choose to remain silent, just like in the law, you have the right to remain silent because you have the right to not self-incriminate, and you have the right to not engage in something if you don't want to. But your silence absolutely gets read. The moment you invoke your right to remain silent, everybody makes a bunch of assumptions and presumptions over why you're choosing to remain silent. It's very rarely ever neutral. And everyone else does the same. It's like if you're in a relationship with someone and someone is constantly doing something and you choose to suck it up instead of say, hey, this bothers me. And it bothers me because there's like this rippling effect. Well, you've created an agreement with them, right? It's like when we're in relationships are kind of the easiest thing that most people understand. It's like you're in a relationship with someone and they have a habit that they're doing repeatedly. And that habit, so say it's they put dishes in the sink and never clean them instead of putting them in the dishwasher or washing them by hand. And then that becomes your responsibility to keep doing it, even though this person's fully capable and they just choose not to. That becomes an extra load on you. That means that there is now an expectation going forward that you are going to continue cleaning the dishes or putting them in the dishwasher. It builds resentment. It can build an uneven workload in the home. There's no consideration for how that makes you feel, and there's not a meeting of the minds because you may have the expectation of like, why can't this person just put their damn dishes in the dishwasher? But if you've never expressed it, that's not what the agreement is. The agreement from the perspective of the other person is, I don't have to because someone else is taking care of it. That bleeds into our workforce and our workplace every time we take on more tasks outside of the scope of our employment contract and our duties as listed, which is why if you're presented an employment contract that says and other duties, redline it out, cross it out, never let someone leave an open miscellaneous category inside of a compensation structure for you, because it will absolutely get you every single time. Like, we have the right to show up, but because we operate from these uh, deep-seated wounds, which I talked about a few weeks ago around scarcity and lack and abandonment. Like, if I don't do XYZ, I'm going to lose something. Part of the COVID debate, right? If I don't do what I'm told, I'm going to lose access, I'm going to lose people, I'm going to lose money. We react from that space. This is like the deep inner work that we have to do in order to learn how to stay in right relationship with ourselves, and understand that the reputation you hold with yourself, the reputation that you have with your own integrity, is far more important than any reputation you can hold outside of yourself. Because no one has to live in your head, no one has to live in your body, no one has to live with the consequences of the decisions when you choose to move out of alignment with what you know to be true. And they have deep, deep ramifications. That's why in the last episode, I put in the show notes somatic charts about where emotions sit in the body and how they can manifest into various diseases and physical ailments, because those are the effects, the responses to the decisions that we make every day. It's really important. And in the personal development world, there was a book written, very popular. It's like a short novella. A lot of people have read it, called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And I remember reading it going, oh yeah, this is great. And then sitting with it for a while, but going, wait a second. This book assumes that you can actually make a decent agreement in the first place, right? Because the four agreements are: be impeccable with your word, don't take it personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. Which sound beautiful, right? They sound beautiful. But if you don't have the ability to halt, you don't have the ability to take a beat, to take a breath, to witness the experience that's happening around you, being impeccable with your word can actually cause you to shrink in spaces. Not taking something personally can cause you to override your knowing that you're in a situation that you shouldn't be in. Not making assumptions can prevent you from showing up and standing in the face of an offer and saying, I see what you're saying, but there's holes. There's holes in that agreement. Someone can present you with an offer, and there can be massive holes in it where assumptions get made, and that's where the consideration and the mutuality blow apart, because it's not all fully defined in black and white. There's gray areas, loopholes, as we like to call them. And you have every right, when you were presented with an offer, to show up and say, I see what your offer is, but these things have not been taken into consideration. This is what I don't understand. I will not agree to it in the absence of these things being met. And I have the right to do it because of my role, title, standing in whatever the situation is, right? So inside of my work, I have witness. How do you witness what's happening? Which is HALT, honesty, acceptance, loyalty, and trust. And then claim. Claim being, do you know your capacity, your jurisdiction, and the contracts, right? Capacity being who you are, your title, your role, where you're standing. That's your jurisdiction. Are you in a private business? Are you in your home? Are you in your community? Are you in a public space? Like, where are you? Where are you physically standing? And then contracts. What are all the contracts that are binding you to those places? This is why the governance piece is so important, right? Because when you know who you are, your capacity, when you can witness that accurately, or as accurately as possible, because again, understanding, perception, perspective always expands the lens of the witness. It's never finite, it's never fixed. You can make a claim based on the function that you know everyone is supposed to be executing, which is capacity, jurisdiction, and contracts. Well, now we get to look at how all of that works together to hold everybody in their appropriate jurisdiction. And then we're going to look and see, is there a track record of people operating inside of the scope of what they're supposed to be doing continuously over time? And more times than not, no, including ourselves. That's why it's never like a finger out, right? Finger out is three back. We always have to look at ourselves first, but we always have to also be mindful that when we're not using our voice, when we're not using our pen, when we're not showing up to these offers that we're being presented on a regular basis, we can end up in some really bad contracts. Nova Scotia Power being a perfect example. You cannot go and get a copy of a residential rate contract. They don't exist. And then the Energy Tribunal gets to make everything up as they go. We can't get a contract because you never asked for one, and the regulation said, unless you asked for one, we don't have to give you one. And you would have had to know to ask that before you even set up your account, even though there's absolutely no way for you to, one, know that you were supposed to ask for it, two, a way for you to request it. And then once you're in, you're in. Too bad, so sad. Shame on you for not knowing better, which is insane, right? So that's why there's also things that are called, I don't want to go too far into this, but what's known as unconscionable contracts of adhesion. And that's essentially a one-sided contract where the terms were so unclear, where there was no possible way that you could have known fully what you were getting into. And not only known what you were fully getting into, but also no way for you to contract back. And we see these all the time, right? When you sign up for a social media site and you have to click I agree and you have to click the terms and conditions, or you don't have access. You can't go in and redline the contract and say, well, I don't agree with this and I don't agree with that. It's a take it or leave it offer. A contract of adhesion is a take it or leave it. It's like, here it is, take it or leave it. That's why I look at Nova Scotia Power as unconscionable contracts of adhesion, because they have full monopolies on our energy grid. We do not have another option. Even if you want to do solar, you're still bound to Nova Scotia Power, because not only do you have to feed your excess energy back to the grid, Nova Scotia Power, through the electrical code, is required, if you're doing a new build, to sign off on your occupancy permit, whether you're using them or not. It's insane. Another example of the not showing up and exercising your voice is the policy code of conduct that's sitting inside of the schools right now. And this is where it gets tricky. You'll be asked for your feedback or for comments. You don't use their portals. You don't send feedback. You don't send comments because you've been presented a notice. They circulated draft policy code of conduct so that they could say the general public looked at this and they gave us their comments before we proceeded. I read that as an offer to contract, went through the policy code of conduct, immediately saw that they removed sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and sexual misconduct, which they can't because they are absolutely embedded and enshrined in the Education Act, and sent them a notice saying, I see what you just did. You just removed these. You unequivocally do not have the jurisdiction or the right to do that. Put it back in. And no one would respond because they were put on a gag from the policy team. I have podcasts on that as well. That came out when I went to the ombudsman to have them adjudicate and compel a response. But this is why participation matters, because then after the fact, it's so much harder. It's so much harder. They put them back in, but didn't know until after the fact, after they already circulated a finalized policy. And not only did they put those 3 back in, thank God, as they should have, as they were supposed to, because at that point, legality would have come into effect as to whether or not that was an enforceable policy code of conduct, because it's outside the scope of the Education Act. They ended up adding 5 things that don't sit inside of the Education Act. And I guarantee you those 5 things have caused a lot of issues this year. And again, they were put on full notice that you did this, it's outside the scope, it shouldn't be there, take them out, and they won't do it. They keep saying that the minister has the right to add whatever they want in there. No, they don't. No, they don't. But that's how they shut down conversations, to make you feel like you have no say, you have no power. But not enough people are taking this up. Not enough people took it up. I was like the lone person doing it. This is why participation matters. This is why how you choose to participate every day matters. And your level of participation and your quality of participation is absolutely going to be formed by the agreements that you hold with yourself, because the agreements that you make with yourself become the contracts that you enter into with the rest of the world. And as I've said repeatedly, we live in a commercial world. Everything is business. Everything ultimately is a contract, which is why, whether a lawyer will agree with me or not, I look at everything I'm presented with like an offer to contract 100% of the time. And then I decide yes or no. And then I choose what I'm going to redline and I choose what I'm going to engage with. And it can be crazy making, and it can take a lot of your time, attention, and energy, which is why it's so important that everybody participates, because everyone's going to have a different focus. Everyone has a different thing that is important to them. And because of that, it means the more people that show up and participate in life on a regular basis, appropriately, not belligerently, from a place of neutrality, from a place of a regulated nervous system, all bases get covered. Like, all bases get covered. You know, they say many hands make light work. What is it? The tide rises all ships. Like, it becomes much easier. And going back to what I was saying earlier, this is how we start moving out of a transactional society of give and take. Like, I'm going to give you this, but I'm going to take this, whether it's equitable or not, to moving into reciprocity. Is there equitable and equal exchange occurring? And you don't know that if you don't know what you're looking at, which is why, to recap, the 5 elements of a contract are so important to begin to embody in your everyday life. Look for the offer. What is being offered to you? Look at what you're accepting through your silence, through your actions, through your words. Consideration. Is everyone and everything, like including the earth, like let's look at our natural world as well. Is everything being equally considered during this? Are we taking more than we give? What page is everyone on? Is there a meeting of the minds, mutuality and capacity? Is everyone showing up in the appropriate title and role in this exchange? And then at the end of the day, depending on what you're looking at, is this even legally viable? Are there laws that prohibit this agreement from forming in the first place? Vitally, vitally, vitally important to how we shape ourselves, shape our families, shape our communities, shape our institutions. Like, vitally important. And also super dry. I know this stuff is not the most interesting, but it absolutely is impactful. It's absolutely life-changing, because if I've learned anything in my own life, in my own journey, specifically going through burnout, because burnout is, for me, a symptom of lack of structure, moving against nature, not operating inside of a structure that ensures that you're not overcapacitating yourself. And it's really important. It's actually in the 9. So I put this in one of the show notes. I'll put it in this one again. We have the 9 fields of sovereign wealth, and one of them is resources. And when your resources are collapsing, that's when you start falling into scarcity, right? So your resource is the capacity to exchange and invest time, money, and materials. That's what I have listed as the capacity for your resources. And when you start moving into collapse, that's when you're entering into scarcity. And scarcity is the collapse into fear or control around resources. And it can appear as hoarding, overgiving, deprivation mindset, disrupting natural flow, lack of trust and reciprocity. Like, they just don't exist. But when you're moving in alignment with resource, and the resources that you have being your capacity to exchange, invest time, money, and materials, that's when you're moving into reciprocal exchange with people, which is the balanced exchange of energy, care, and resource. And it emerges in systems where giving and receiving circulate freely, creating wealth that nourishes all involved. Important. I think so anyway. Enough that I've spent the last 4 years building it. But even and I'll kind of leave you with this because it's something that I've been thinking about a lot over the last few years. Like even in relationship, right? Like the internet is full of relationship advice and relationship gurus, and there's such a war between men and women right now, and such an inverted lack of polarity between the two. And whether you're in a romantic relationship, a partnership, with your family, with anyone, can we look at what someone is showing up and offering? Like, what are they actually offering? Are they giving you time, attention, money, stress, peace, problems, attitude? Like, what are they offering you? And can you accept that at face value? Right? We're always trying to change people. Like, we're always trying to change other people outside of us, and fix them instead of just trying to change ourselves, right? So can you in relationship go, I see what you're offering. This is what I'm offering. Is there consideration? Is there a meeting of the minds? Do we have the capacity to even be in this exchange with each other? And I'm either going to accept that or not. How much easier would life be? How much easier would life be if instead of operating through the premise, as I said earlier, of give and take with people, well, you're giving this and I'm taking this and I'm giving this and I'm taking this, but it's like, this is what I have to offer. I am showing up with something to offer. And like I said, it's neutral. Could be good, could be great, could be terrible, could be soul sucking. But that's what they have to offer. And you're either willing to accept it or not. And when you can start looking at that within yourself and taking a full accounting of how you're showing up and what you're showing up to offer in all situations, then it starts illuminating all of the gaps in the systems and structures around you as well. A Course in Miracles, Marianne Williamson often says, only what I'm not giving can be lacking in any situation. What are you not giving? What are you not offering? And the moment you switch your vocabulary from give and take to offer and accept, from now on, I promise, when you hear offer and accept, you're going to hear consideration, mutuality, and capacity. And you're going to see that you're actually being presented an agreement. And now you get to see if you want to sit in that agreement or if you want to change the terms. Because again, the terms can change at any time. You can redline agreements and contracts at any time if you want to. But first you have to be able to recognize them and see that they exist in the first place. But always start with yourself. Like I said, finger out, 3 back, who you tell the world you are, who you're actually being, the gap between the two. I'm focused on this gap all the time because I know some days it's like this and some days it's like this. It just depends, right? No one's perfect, but we're not here for perfect. We're not here for perfection. We're here for consistency, because consistency is the continuity. And without consistency, we constantly find ourselves in these up and down and up and down and up and down cycles because there's not enough consistency over time for things to stabilize. So anyway, on that note, I hope you found pieces of this valuable. Hope it made sense. I'm going to throw some resources into the show notes, some of the articles that I've talked about, some of the graphics that I think are important. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, send me a message, drop it in the comments, share this with anyone that you think may also find it useful. But as always, thank you so much for being here. And I will see you same time, same place next week.